Here's the good news to help us understand a little bit what went on Sunday. Congressman Randy Forbes, he's currently the congressman of the 4th District. He has moved to the 2nd District, and he is involved in a three-way primary that will be decided tomorrow. It's finally coming, and that is between Congressman Randy Forbes, House of Delegates member Scott Taylor, and Virginia Beach lawyer Pat Cardwell. Congressman, good to have you with us, sir.
John, it's great to be with you this morning.
Now, I tell you what is very frustrating, Congressman, to a lot of people, and I told this to Brian Moran, Secretary of Homeland Security. I'm like, a lot of people just don't understand why our president cannot call the enemy out for what it is. This is a radical Islamic terrorist attack. We're at war. This killer called himself an ISIS fighter. Then ISIS turned around and said the massacre was carried out by an ISIS fighter. Well, in my book, if there's fighters killing us, are we not at war?
Well, John, one of the things that all of us realize today, and you alluded to this at the outset, when one innocent American is killed, we all mourn. When 50-plus innocent Americans are killed, we mourn 50 times that amount. So across the country today, all of us are heartbroken by what we see. But the second thing, what you pointed out, we have to roll up our sleeves and not chase red herrings, which this president is often tempted to do, but actually focus on what's the real concern. And you and I have talked about this before. It's not a new thing. The big concern we have had with ISIS all along is twofold. One, that ISIS conducts many of these acts around the globe against innocent people because they are orchestrated, they are called upon by their leadership. But equally important is the fact that if you let ISIS continue to flourish and grow the way this administration has, then you have these rogue acts that will take place, but ISIS is just as much the catalyst for causing them to happen, and that's what we see in this case. And you are so correct. Remember, we now have evidence. We have testimony before the Armed Services Committee that when this administration came into office, Al-Qaeda, ISIS was defeated. That's the testimony that we have. We know this administration believed that also because when they did their national strategic guidance, that's the document they used to do all of their national defense for the whole time they've been in office. They had as one of the assumptions that ISIS didn't exist, that it was defeated, and that it was beaten. And then this administration, correctly as you stated, incorrectly for them, but you correctly stated it, they prohibited people from the administration and the Pentagon from even using the phrase war on terrorism, thinking if they just pretended it wasn't there, it would go away. All their military advice was that if they ignored this and walked away from it, it was going to grow into a major problem around the globe. That's why you and I are seeing ISIS where it is today. We're going to see more of these kind of rogue acts unless this administration comes up with a strategy to actually call it what it is, and then once you've called it what it is, to put in a strategy to defeat ISIS.
Congressman, is political correctness now threatening our very security?
Well, political correctness has, for years now, threatened our rights. I believe you are correct because I happen to believe that one of our rights is to live secure in this country, and I think it is now threatening those very rights because when you probably saw it last week, we had a major debate, John, on the floor of the House of Representatives by the Democrats who want to change the word or phrase illegal alien and don't even want to use that phrase at all in the Library of Congress or any place else. This has been an administration that has consistently thought if they didn't talk about China as a competitor, China wouldn't be a competitor. They were wrong. If they didn't talk about a war on terrorism, we wouldn't have a war on terrorism. That if you don't talk about people being illegally here, that we won't have people illegally here. And, John, you're correct. We're now at the point where this is threatening not just many of the rights that are in the Constitution, but also our very right to be secure within our homeland.
It's unbelievable. So, Congressman, the Senate this week voted down an amendment to the defense bill, the defense authorization bill, that would preserve the U.S. refugee program for endangered Afghan military interpreters. So that got blocked. Are you in favor of that?
Well, John, one of the things the Senate also knocked down was they did not put $18 billion in the budget that we felt needed to be in the budget for national defense. There's a number of provisions that, they knocked down in there. We are going to have a conference with the Senate at that particular point in time. There's going to be a lot of these issues that I think the House is ultimately going to prevail on over the Senate's decisions, and that's why we have these conferences. I'm looking forward to being one of the conferees and to making sure the House bill passes because I think it's the right thing for us to do for national defense.
All right, presumptive nominee for the Republicans, Donald Trump. Yesterday, Congressman Forbes reiterated his desire to simply stop all immigration for a period of time in the United States, specifically those from the Middle East who are Muslim. And he said again yesterday, obviously we don't have a handle on what's going on right now in America. Why would we put additional pressure on ourselves to bring more people in that, regardless of what we think we're vetting them, we don't really know, and how they interact with these other cells in the U.S.? And he says, why not just put a stop right now until we figure this out? If he's elected president and you're reelected back to Congress, is that something that you'd be willing to condone?
Well, I think there are two things. I think, one, if you listened just a week or so ago, someone asked Duncan Hunter, who, as you know,
yes,
came out and supported Mr. Trump early on, what was one of the major things he could do as president. And Duncan Hunter said he could go talk to Randy Forbes about national security and what we need to do for the national defense of the country. And so while the president, I'm already putting him president, but it's Mr. Trump as our nominee and hopefully our next president, he's going to have a lot of sitting down and talking with him about some of those things and what I think we need to do. And if I had the privilege of talking to him about this particular issue and what we need to do on immigration, what I would tell him is that there are a lot of things that we could do immediately that would make huge impacts that I would recommend that he do. And the first thing that I would say is when we look at what Americans are doing with their borders, they're very concerned. But we really don't have to have any new laws, John. We just have to enforce the laws we have as far as illegal immigration. That would be the first thing. The second thing I would tell him is that if you do a complete shutdown of all of our immigration, realize that's going to have an enormous impact on our economy, our tourism, all of those kind of things. So if you don't want to go that far, then what I would recommend that you do is the bill you and I talked about a week or so ago that we wrote on the visa security bill, to recognize that it's not just people coming here illegally that create a problem, but it's people that are coming in by visas. And we wrote a bill that would shut down and add a lot of protections to those visa provisions that I think we could get in right away that would have a huge impact. And then the third thing, we know on some of the Syrian refugee situation, you're absolutely correct, that we just don't have the processes to vet these individuals before they come in here. If we have a situation where we can't vet them and make sure they're not going to be threats to the national defense, then we should stop those processes until we can get a proper vetting process in place.
I mean, that's just common sense. And I want to get back to your visas that we get, student visas, HB1 visas, HB5. I mean, you read report after report, Congressman Forbes, how these are being abused, many of them for sale. Once the people come in, their visa expires. They don't go back. They don't register. We can't find them. I mean, the system is completely amok. And even in getting that passed, I mean, what does leadership say when you confront them with this? How do they react to this stuff that, they just shuffle their feet with it?
have to realize that when you look at leadership, it's whether it's the House, the Senate, or the White House. And, in the House, we did get this bill passed out of the Judiciary Committee. I believe it'll come to the House floor. I think it'll pass the House. And then the question is, what's the Senate going to do with this bill? And then if that's passed, what the president's going to do with it. I'm not optimistic we're going to have a President Obama sign anything in that's going to tighten down on some of these common sense solutions that you pointed out. But I'm hopeful we get it in a position so when we have a President Trump that comes in, he will be able to do that. And, there are just some very common sense things, John, that are there, such as whether or not we need to make sure the applications are complete, that people are signing them under oath, that we do enhance security for some of these high-risk areas like Somalia, Yemen, that people, Iran, Syria, that people are coming in from. And then that we do two very simple things. We look at, one, the databases of offenses they've committed, but also we look at social media. Oftentimes, as we saw in the situation we just had in Orlando, there's a lot of we're not even allowing that to happen now when people are coming into the United States. We need to change all that. Just makes good common sense, but it could really add a lot of layers of protections for innocent Americans.
All right, let's get to the Puerto Rican debt restructure or so-called bailout that your leadership pushed on Thursday. Rob Whitman and some Virginia Republicans voting no. Congressman, this is just mind-boggling to average people out there who see their investment shrinking, their wages going down. They're in a very tough economic environment, and yet we constantly see Wall Street elites, 1% tycoons getting bailed out no matter what they do. I mean, and one of the companies, that was one of the major bondholders, you know who it was? Bain Capital, Mitt Romney's company. So they buy these bonds, they get a high return on them, they're high risk for Puerto Rico or whatever, and they know, look, if it fails, somehow the government will bail us out again. I mean, what do you say to the average working American who really feels the system is rigged, and then you see this Puerto Rican bailout, and you say, you know what, if that was my money, I'd be screwed. How do you answer that?
Well, first of all, I would answer it by telling them that I voted against it. The second thing I would tell them is this isn't the first time that Congress has had an attempted bailout. I've talked with you before when under President Obama they had a number of bailouts and what people would clearly all agree were bailouts. And under President Bush they had a number of things that people would all agree on were bailouts, at least for the items that people have recognized as bailouts. There were only 17 members of Congress that voted against all of them under President Bush and President Obama. I was one of those 17 people. The second thing, John, is, well, you're right that this is what I think is an unfair bailout of some of these companies. There's an even greater risk that I think is here, and one of the reasons I voted against it, and I think one of the reasons that Rob voted against it, because I spoke with him about it, and that is the fact that if you do this for Puerto Rico, I can almost guarantee you're going to have several states, Illinois being one of the first ones, that are going to line up and they're going to want to do the exact same thing. And one of the big things that they're going to try to bail out, John, that could be absolutely bankrupt in this country are the mismanaged pension funds from some of these major unions that are going to be across the country. And I think you're going to see all of that coming to play if this Puerto Rico bill gets through.
You're absolutely right, because what is going to be next? Now we're going to get cities bailed out and everything else. And just so our audience knows, the three Republicans that voted for the Puerto Rican bailout, Barbara Comstock, Robert Hurt, and surprisingly, Morgan Griffith, and those Republicans voting no. Dr. Rob Whitman, Randy Forbes on with us now. Of course, Chairman Bob Goodlett and Scott Ridgell, just so that everybody knows where everybody stands. And the three Democrats in Virginia voted for it. I got a question here that got texted in from Jim in Virginia Beach. He says, please ask Congressman Forbes why he has not issued a declaration of war or at least a letter of marque or a letter of reprisal against our enemies, these Islamic terrorists. Can you answer that, Congressman?
Sure, I can. Jim probably knows that as an individual member of Congress, I have no right to issue a declaration of war against anybody. That's something that would be issued by Congress. While I can control the things that are within my subcommittee as chairman, that is, number of ships that the Navy has, whether the Marine Corps gets their amphibious ship, what we do with Air Force Stryker bombers, whether or not we have any kind of declaration of war coming out would have to be determined by the leadership of the House, and they haven't brought any such bill to the floor. I would say this, I would welcome that debate, I would welcome that discussion and that piece of legislation, but I want to emphasize this. John, you mentioned earlier on how the president oftentimes uses red herrings to get people off focus of where his actual problems
right.
are. The president will oftentimes say the reason he's had such failed dealings with ISIS is because he hasn't had a declaration of war or he hasn't had an authorization to use military force. But just remember that every bit of the testimony we have had from everyone from the Pentagon has been they have all the authority they need. What they have been missing is they have had no strategy by this administration, and they haven't resourced that strategy to actually go after and defeat ISIS. So while I welcome the debate on an authorization of military force, or that is fine, and we'd love to have that debate. It should never get our eyes off the fact that what we have needed for the last 8 years has been a strategy from this administration and to resource that strategy to actually defeat ISIS.
Well, you're right. We have not had one. You've got a president, Congressman, that won't even call the enemy by its name. I mean, the whole thing is maddening for what is going on right now. I've got a couple more minutes. I want to talk about your campaign, the final days of it. Can you just share with our audience the level of enthusiasm, what you've seen, knocking on doors, what people have been saying?
Yeah, John, first of all, thank you. Thanks for having us on. We're excited. This is, where we've been working for the last several months. As you come up to this particular point in time, there's been, a lot from our opponents that's been, let's just say, in the best light we can, shrill talk. We've been just working, and we know that tomorrow is going to belong to the voters that know that in this race, it's not a throwaway race. This race has real consequences, and we are so excited about where we are. We have had literally just on this weekend alone, John, we've had hundreds of volunteers. They knocked on over 5. And that's just coming into the last day. We see so much energy out there because the folks realize that when their jobs are at stake, it's a big difference whether they have the chairman of the committee that writes the legislation or a freshman in there fighting for their jobs who has to get permission to speak. The tourism industry here is so important. That's why the national hotel industry has been so supportive of us. The ports is huge. They know it's important that I chair the Panama Canal Caucus. NASA, we have 2 out of 10 facilities in this district. They're excited because I chair the NASA caucus. It's going to be huge to them. Our shipyard, ship repair facilities are out big time. People at Little Creek, 200 jobs that were saved because of the work we did this year in NDAA. They're going to be out tomorrow. They're excited. The Marines who got their amphibious ship last year, they're excited about that. We have veterans and families who know that they could have lost their commissaries last year if we hadn't been in there fighting for them. But most of all, these rights that we're fighting for, I'm happy the National Right to Life Association has endorsed us. The NRA has given us an A+ rating. Nobody else in this race has that. Numbers USA, top citizen watchdog for immigration, has given us an A+ rating. And the bottom 2 things that are, getting people excited is the fact that we have people who believe in religious freedom. They're out there realizing that we've been fighting for them and will continue. So, John, with all that, thanks so much for letting me be on with you, and look forward to being on with you, I think, again tomorrow.
Congressman, you seem pretty fired up today.
We're excited. This is what we work for. We put ours in action, and not just in words. And I think tomorrow you're going to see that action paying off, and we're excited about it, John.
All right. I think it's going to be a very close race. I've said that throughout, and I think that's how it's going to play out. Thank you, Congressman, for